Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all, wherever you are tuning in from tonight. Maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath, let your shoulders drop, maybe pull the covers up a bit higher, and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. Dolly Bantry's estate seemed peaceful that summer. Where roses climbed old stone walls and afternoon tea was served precisely at 4. Where secrets seemed impossible among the hedgerows and polite conversation. Then Sir Reginald Hargrove was found dead in the library at Gossington Hall. A silver coffee cup still warm beside his hand, his face strangely peaceful. Police called it a simple heart attack, but Miss Marple saw the faint, bluish tinge at his lips and the way one book had been pulled forward on the shelf. 5 categories of evidence hide in this story. The hunt begins. Chapter 1. The hunt begins. The morning air carried the sweet scent of garden flowers mixed with faint coal smoke drifting from the kitchen chimney. Miss Jane Marple stepped from the car Dolly Bantry had sent, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel drive. The estate appeared unchanged with its warm red bricks and climbing roses, yet a subtle tension hung in the crisp air. Dolly Bantry rushed out to greet her, face pale beneath her rouge. "Jane, thank heavens! Reginald was found dead in the library this morning. The doctor calls it a heart attack, but something feels terribly wrong." Her hands twisted a soft lace handkerchief. Miss Marple patted her arm, the rough tweed of her jacket brushing Dolly's smooth wool cardigan. "Now, my dear, let us examine the room carefully. One notices these things, living in a village." The scent of fresh baking and lavender polish greeted them inside the house. They entered the library. The air felt cooler here, almost chill after the warm hallway. Sir Reginald Hargrove sat slumped in a high-backed leather chair, body stiff. A silver coffee cup rested on the table beside him, its smooth china cold to Miss Marple's touch. The fire had burned low, leaving faint warmth and occasional embers crackling. Birds sang brightly outside the tall windows. "Did you catch that? The window was locked from the inside," Miss Marple murmured. Her knitting needles clicked softly as she sat. "Something in this room is wrong. Can you spot it?" One book on local history stood pulled slightly forward on the shelf, its worn leather binding distinct under her fingers. Dolly shivered, pulling her cardigan closer. "The maid found him after breakfast. He was staying with us for the weekend." Her voice trembled as the clock on the mantel ticked steadily. "Doctor!" Haydock arrived, smelling of carbolic and strong tea. "Natural causes, I'm afraid," he declared confidently. Yet Miss Marple noticed how he avoided the coffee cup. His hands moved restlessly over his bag, the cold metal clasp clicking. Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray? Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it? In the drawing-room interviews began. Lady Edith Hargrove entered first, her expensive perfume cutting through the lavender scent. "My husband was perfectly healthy yesterday," she said firmly, eyes darting toward the library door. "We had a pleasant evening." Her hands stayed too still in her lap. "File this away. It matters later." Miss Marple offered sweet biscuits, their dry taste crumbly. "Any discomfort, Lady Hargrove?" The hot tea steamed gently between them. "No, none at all." That statement already hinted at contradictions. Young James Hargrove followed, smelling of cigarette smoke in his rough tweed jacket. "Uncle Reggie promised to help with my debts," we argued, but nothing serious. His eyes flicked nervously to the door, and he shifted in the creaking leather chair. Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with that account. Wilkins the butler came next, shoes soft on the carpet. "I served coffee at 10:30. Sir Reginald seemed himself. His soft wool waistcoat looked ordinary, but his hands trembled slightly when describing the evening. Mr. Price, the neighbor, arrived flushed from the cold wind. We had business disagreements, but nothing more. He gripped the chair arms tightly while sipping hot tea. Finally, young maid Elsie appeared, apron carrying the warm scent of baking bread. He was just sitting there, miss. I thought he'd fallen asleep. She clutched her rough work-worn hands together. As evening fell, Miss Marple sat with Dolly by the sitting-room fire. Flames crackled warmly against the chill wind rattling the windows. The smell of coal smoke mixed with lingering dinner roast. Her needles clicked rhythmically. Chapter 2. Gathering Evidence. The next morning brought a sharp chill wind across the estate gardens. Miss Marple walked the gravel paths with Dolly Bantry, the stones crunching loudly under their shoes. The sweet scent of garden flowers mixed with damp earth and lingering coal smoke from the breakfast fire. Birds sang brightly overhead while the distant church bells rang 9 times. They began the first interview in the sunny morning room. Lady Edith Hargrove sat stiffly by the window, holding a smooth china teacup warm in her hands. The smell of strong tea and fresh baking biscuits filled the air. "Reginald and I were completely devoted," she insisted, her voice steady. Yet when Miss Marple asked about the argument James had mentioned, her eyes narrowed slightly. "My nephew exaggerates. There was no argument worth speaking of." Miss Marple offered her a sweet biscuit, its dry taste crumbling on the tongue. "How very interesting," she murmured, knitting needles clicking softly. "That statement contradicts something earlier. Remember what? Did you catch that small hesitation in her voice?" Lady Hargrove set her cup down with a sharp clink. "We had a pleasant evening. He retired early with his coffee." Her hands remained too still in her lap, the soft wool of her cardigan smooth against her skin. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking each careful word. Next, James Hargrove was questioned near the tall windows overlooking the lawn. A cold draught slipped through a crack, cooling the room. He smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, his rough tweed jacket rough under Miss Marple's quick glance. "Uncle Reggie promised to help with my debts," he said quickly, shifting in the worn leather chair that creaked beneath him. "We argued a little, but it was nothing serious. I went to bed at 11. Dolly poured more hot tea, its steam rising warmly. The gardener mentioned hearing footsteps on the gravel at midnight," Miss Marple said gently. The young man's eyes flicked nervously toward the door. Timeline just cracked. "Did you catch where?" Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with that alibi. James ran a hand through his hair. Must have been someone else. I was asleep. His fingers trembled slightly on the cold metal cigarette case he pulled from his pocket. "Before I continue, what do you think happened?" The third interview took place in the servants' hall. The comforting aroma of baking bread and lavender polish was stronger here. Wilkins the butler stood formally, his soft wool waistcoat neat. "I prepared the coffee tray myself at 10:30, he stated smoothly. "Sir Reginald seemed quite himself when I left." Yet Elsie the maid had already mentioned seeing him return to the library later that night. Spoken lies emerge when small details conflict. Miss Marple watched his hands, which fidgeted with a button. "Are you quite certain of the time, Wilkins?" The kettle whistled shrilly on the stove, breaking the tension. Wilkins swallowed. "Positive, madam." His shoes made soft sounds on the tiled floor as he shifted weight. "File this away. It matters later. Watch their hands, their eyes." "What do they betray, Mr. Price?" The neighboring landowner arrived for his interview flushed from the cold morning wind. The drawing-room fire crackled warmly as he sat down. He smelled of pipe tobacco and outdoor chill. Our land dispute was settled amicably, he blustered, gripping the chair arms tightly, the texture of worn leather beneath his palms. I'd never wish Reginald harm. Dolly remembered the heated voices at dinner the night before. Miss Marple poured hot tea, its comforting aroma rising. Yet voices were raised, I believe. The man's face reddened further. Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it? In the afternoon, Miss Marple returned alone to the library. The room felt cooler without the fire. She examined the shelves carefully. The faint scent of old books and polish present. Behind the pulled-forward volume of local history, her fingers found a small key, its cold metal surprising against her skin. This was new physical evidence. Dolly joined her shortly after, the scent of lavender from her sachet, mixing with the room's stillness. "Jane, these interviews only confuse me more," she confessed, pulling her cardigan tighter against the chill. Miss Marple's needles clicked thoughtfully as she considered the contradictions. The grandfather clock in the hall struck the hour with deep tones, while outside birds continued their cheerful song. Gravel crunched faintly as someone walked the path below the window. "Evidence gathers," Miss Marple said quietly. "But which matters?" Chapter 3. The trail deepens. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the library windows as Miss Marple gathered everyone for an extended interrogation. A chill wind pressed against the glass while the fire crackled warmly in the grate, pushing back the cold. The air carried the mingled scents of garden flowers from outside, lavender polish on the shelves, and strong tea Dolly had just poured. Birds sang intermittently, their notes sharp against the heavy tension in the room. All suspects sat in a semicircle. Lady Edith Hargrove held her smooth china teacup tightly, the hot liquid warming her fingers. "This is quite unnecessary," she said, her voice clipped. Wilkins stood near the door, his soft wool waistcoat neat, but his hands betraying faint tremors. James Hargrove shifted in the worn leather chair that creaked with every movement, while Mr. Price gripped the arms of his seat, the rough tweed of his jacket brushing against the fabric. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked steadily. "Let us speak plainly. Where exactly were each of you after 10:30? She asked. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the hall, marking the silence that followed. "Did you catch that?" The window was locked inside, yet someone clearly returned here later. Lady Hargrove spoke first. "I retired to my room with a headache. I heard nothing." Her eyes darted away from the coffee cup on the side table. "That statement contradicts something earlier. Remember what? Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with that alibi." James leaned forward. "I walked in the garden to clear my head. The gravel was loud under my shoes. His rough tweed sleeve caught on the chair, yet the gardener had seen no one. Timeline just cracked again. Did you catch where?" Wilkins cleared his throat. "I checked the locks as usual and went to the servants' quarters. His shoes made soft sounds on the carpet." Elsie, standing nervously by the door, twisted her apron, the rough fabric bunching in her work-worn hands. "But I saw Mr. Wilkins near the library door around 11, she said softly, the scent of baking bread still clinging to her clothes. "Mr. Price blustered. "My business with Reginald ended amicably at dinner." The fire crackled louder as he spoke, sending a wave of warm air across the chill room. "Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray?" His knuckles showed white on the chair. Miss Marple rose slowly and moved to the bookshelves. The texture of the old volumes felt cool and dusty under her fingers. She reached behind the pulled-forward local history book and retrieved a small envelope hidden there. Inside lay a folded letter and a tiny vial. The cold metal cap of the vial felt significant in her palm. "Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it?" she murmured. "File this away," It matters later." The hidden connection emerged as she read aloud part of the letter. It revealed a secret affair between Lady Hargrove and Wilkins, their shared financial troubles tied to Sir Reginald's will. "You both stood to gain considerably," Miss Marple said quietly. The smell of coal smoke drifted faintly from the dying fire as Lady Hargrove's face paled. "Before I continue, what do you think happened?" Dolly gasped, the smooth wool of her cardigan suddenly feeling too warm in the tense room. Gravel crunched outside as a servant passed, while the kettle whistled distantly from the kitchen. Sweet biscuits lay untouched on a plate, their dry taste forgotten. Chapter 4. False Trails. The following day dawned with a cold morning mist hanging over the estate. Miss Marple moved between rooms with quiet determination, her rough tweed jacket brushing against door frames. The scent of garden flowers drifted through open windows mixed with coal smoke from the kitchen fires and fresh baking bread. Gravel crunched under hurried footsteps as servants moved about their duties. First, Miss Marple pursued the trail of James Hargrove's gambling debts in the morning room. James sat by the fire, which crackled warmly against the chill wind outside. "Uncle Reggie was my only hope," he said, fingers tracing the cold metal edge of his cigarette case. The smooth china teacup in front of him steamed with hot tea. "I owed money to some rough men in London. That's why we argued." Dolly leaned forward, her soft wool cardigan shifting. "Did those men threaten him?" Miss Marple asked. James's eyes darted away. "That statement contradicts something earlier." "Remember what?" Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with that story about the debts. Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray? The young man shifted in the worn leather chair, which creaked loudly. Birds sang brightly outside while the grandfather clock ticked steadily. "I walked the gardens at midnight to think. The gravel was noisy under my shoes, yet no one else had seen him." Timeline just cracked again. "Did you catch where? File this away. It matters later." The second false trail led to Mr. Price in the drawing room. The neighbor arrived flushed from the cold wind, smelling of pipe tobacco and damp earth. "Our land dispute was bitter," he admitted, gripping the chair arms tightly. The lavender polish on the furniture mixed with the scent of strong tea Dolly poured. "Reginald blocked my development plans. I was furious at dinner." Miss Marple offered sweet biscuits, their dry taste crumbling on the tongue. "Did you return to the library after dinner?" Mr. Price's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cup. "Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it?" The fire crackled louder, sending waves of warm air across the room. "I went straight home," he insisted. But the gatekeeper had noted his car still on the drive past 11. "Before I continue, what do you think happened?" Contradictions multiplied as his story shifted under gentle questioning. The kettle whistled distantly from the kitchen. Next, Miss Marple examined the maid Elsie's supposed grudge in the servants' hall. The comforting aroma of baking was strongest here, along with lavender from drying herbs. Elsie twisted her rough work-worn apron, eyes downcast. "Sir Reginald scolded me once for breaking a vase," she confessed softly. "I was angry, but I'd never harm him." Her shoes made soft sounds on the tiled floor as she moved. Miss Marple noticed the cold metal key ring at her belt. "Did you enter the library again that night? Did you catch that?" The window was locked inside, yet someone had clearly been there. Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with that alibi already. Elsie shook her head. "No, miss. I went to bed early," yet her voice carried a nervous tremor. The clock in the hall struck the quarter hour with clear chimes, while birds continued their song outside. In the afternoon, Miss Marple followed a new lead about a mysterious visitor. She spoke with Wilkins in the library itself. The room felt cooler now, the fire unlit. Wilkins stood stiffly, his soft wool waistcoat neat. "A stranger came to the side door around 9, he claimed. Tall man, rough voice. He asked for Sir Reginald." The texture of old books felt cool under Miss Marple's fingers as she examined the shelves again. "How very interesting," she murmured. But the description changed slightly each time he spoke. Spoken lies emerge when details keep shifting. The faint scent of coal smoke lingered in the chimney. Dolly joined her, pulling her cardigan tighter against the chill. "Jane, these trails seem to lead everywhere and nowhere." Gravel crunched on the path below the window as someone passed. The smell of garden flowers grew stronger as the mist cleared. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked thoughtfully. "We chase shadows while the real thread waits." She paused, eyes narrowing. "Something in this room is wrong. Can you see it?" One more false trail involved a supposed business letter James claimed to have seen. They searched the desk together, papers rustling with dry sounds. Hot tea was brought in, its aroma comforting amid the growing confusion. Yet the letter never appeared, and accounts differed on its contents. By late afternoon, the contradictions had piled up like fallen leaves. Miss Marple sat with Dolly by the sitting-room fire, its warmth welcome after the cold wind. The scent of dinner preparations, roast and herbs drifted in. Some trails are false, which lead to truth. Chapter 5. The pattern forms. The drawing-room felt heavy with tension that afternoon. A major confrontation was unfolding as Miss Marple gathered the suspects once more. The fire crackled warmly in the grate, pushing back the cold morning chill that still lingered near the windows. The air carried the sweet scent of garden flowers drifting inside, mixed with lavender polish on the furniture and strong tea steaming in smooth china cups. Lady Edith Hargrove sat rigidly, her soft wool dress smooth against the worn leather sofa. Wilkins stood nearby, his hands clasped tightly. James Hargrove shifted restlessly in his rough tweed jacket while Mr. Price gripped his chair arms. Elsie hovered by the door, her apron carrying the fresh smell of baking bread. The grandfather clock ticked loudly, marking each uneasy second. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked steadily. "I believe we have reached the heart of the matter," she said calmly. "Someone in this room knows exactly what happened to Sir Reginald. Did you catch that? The window was locked inside, yet the real story lies in who returned." Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with the stories we've heard. Lady Hargrove's voice rose sharply. "This is outrageous. I demand you stop these accusations." Her eyes darted toward Wilkins, a quick behavioral slip. "Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray?" Her fingers twisted a handkerchief, the fabric soft but gripped too tightly. Suddenly, Wilkins broke. "It wasn't me alone," he blurted, his soft wool waistcoat rising and falling rapidly. The kettle whistled distantly from the kitchen as his face flushed. "She planned it. The affair, the money. We both needed him gone." His shoes scraped softly on the carpet in agitation. Behavioral breakdown revealed the strain he could no longer hide. Miss Marple leaned forward. "How very interesting. Before I continue, what do you think happened?" "Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it?" Dolly poured more hot tea, its comforting aroma filling the room. The fire crackled louder as James stood abruptly, the chair creaking. "You mean they worked together?" Gravel crunched outside as a servant passed by, birds singing brightly in contrast to the heavy atmosphere. Miss Marple moved to the side table. She lifted the silver coffee cup again, its cold metal base significant in her hand. Behind it, she found a small hidden compartment in the table leg, revealing a second vial with residue. The texture of the wood felt worn and recently disturbed under her fingers. This crucial evidence confirms the poison was added after the first cup," she announced. "File this away. It matters later." The smell of coal smoke drifted faintly from the chimney as Lady Hargrove's face paled completely. "You can't prove anything," she whispered, but her hands now trembled visibly. The clock struck the half-hour with deep chimes. Chapter 6. Secrets Unearthed. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the sitting room. Miss Marple had asked Dolly to bring out Sir Reginald's private papers from the study desk. A chill wind rattled the windows while the fire crackled warmly in the grate, pushing back the cold. The air carried the sweet scent of garden flowers drifting inside, mixed with lavender polish on the wood and the comforting aroma of strong tea freshly poured. Dolly placed a worn leather folder on the table, its texture rough under Miss Marple's fingers. "These are his personal documents, Jane. I hope they help." The smooth china teacups steamed gently as they sat together. Birds sang outside while the grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hall. Miss Marple opened the folder carefully. Inside lay letters tied with faded ribbon. "How very interesting," she murmured, her knitting needles pausing. The faint scent of old paper and coal smoke from the chimney filled the room as she read aloud. "These letters show Sir Reginald planned to change his will. He intended to cut off Lady Hargrove entirely." Wilkins was called in next. His shoes made soft sounds on the carpet as he entered, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. "I served the family for 15 years, he said, his soft wool waistcoat neat, but his hands trembling. "Sir Reginald discovered my connection with Lady Hargrove 3 months ago. That statement contradicts something earlier. Remember what? Did you catch that?" "The dates on these letters don't match his story," Miss Marple said quietly. "Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with that account already. File this away. It matters later." James Hargrove joined them, his rough tweed jacket brushing against the chair as he sat. The kettle whistled shrilly from the kitchen. "Uncle found out about their affair and threatened to expose it," he revealed. "He showed me a draft of the new will last week. I was to receive nothing either." His eyes flicked nervously to the door. "Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray?" The hidden connections became clearer as more documents emerged. A letter from 6 months earlier showed Lady Hargrove and Wilkins planning to secure money through a joint investment. The cold metal paperclip felt sharp in Miss Marple's hand. "They needed Sir Reginald gone before the new will was signed," she observed. "Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it?" Dolly gasped, pulling her soft wool cardigan tighter against the chill draft. The fire crackled louder, sending warm air across the room. Gravel crunched outside as someone walked the path. Sweet biscuits lay on a plate, their dry taste forgotten as tension grew, mister. Price was questioned briefly in the same room. The scent of his pipe tobacco mixed with the lavender polish. "I knew about the affair," he admitted reluctantly. "Reginald asked me to witness a new legal paper." His hands gripped the worn leather chair arms tightly. "Before I continue, what do you think happened?" Miss Marple examined a small notebook found in the folder. The pages rustled with dry sounds. "The motive becomes very clear now. Greed and fear of exposure drove them. Sir Reginald had confronted Wilkins 2 nights before his death. The clocks struck the quarter hour with deep chimes, while birds continued singing cheerfully outside. Elsie the maid was brought in last, her apron carrying the fresh smell of baking bread. "I overheard them arguing in the library," she confessed softly, twisting her rough, work-worn hands. "Lady Hargrove said they had no choice." Her voice trembled as the hot tea cooled in her cup. "The past unfolded fully through these testimonies and papers. Lady Hargrove and Wilkins had been involved for over a year. Sir Reginald's discovery threatened their future and the money they expected. Timeline just cracked again. Did you catch where? The evidence showed they acted together on the night of the murder. Miss Marple sat back, needles clicking thoughtfully. The warm fire contrasted with the cold wind pressing at the windows. The smell of garden flowers grew stronger as evening approached. People are really very much alike everywhere, she said softly. Hidden connections and desperate motives twist ordinary lives. Dolly poured more hot tea, its steam rising. It's all coming together, isn't it? Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Secret surface. Truth approaches. Chapter 7, The Revelation. The drawing room was tense as all suspects gathered that evening. A warm fire crackled in the grate, pushing back the chill wind that pressed against the windows. The air carried the sweet scent of garden flowers mixed with lavender polish and strong tea steaming in smooth china cups. Birds sang their final notes outside, while the grandfather clock ticked steadily. Lady Edith Hargrove sat rigidly on the sofa, her soft wool dress smooth against the worn leather. Wilkins stood stiffly nearby, his soft wool waistcoat neat but his hands clasped tightly. James Hargrove shifted in his rough tweed jacket, mister. Price gripped the chair arms, and Elsie hovered by the door, her apron still carrying the faint smell of baking bread. Dolly sat beside Miss Marple, twisting a lace handkerchief. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked rhythmically. "We have reached the end of this unhappy business," she said calmly. "I shall review what the evidence has shown us. Did you catch that? The window was locked inside, yet the truth was inside all along. Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with the stories we've heard. Physical evidence." Miss Marple lifted the silver coffee cup, its cold metal base glinting in the firelight. The pulled book, the hidden key, and the second vial behind the table leg showed tampering after death. The faint bluish tinge on Sir Reginald's lips came from poison added to the second cup. Something in this room was wrong from the start. Can you see it? The texture of the worn leather binding and the cold vial cap told their own clear story. File this away, it matters later. Timeline. The midnight footsteps on the gravel and the locked window exposed the sequence, she continued. The clock struck the hour with deep chimes. James claimed he went to bed at 11, yet footsteps were heard later. Wilkins said he checked locks and retired, but Elsie saw him near the library. Timeline just cracked. Did you catch where? These fractures showed exactly when the poison was administered. Lady Hargrove's face paled. "This is outrageous," she whispered, but her voice lacked strength. "Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray?" Spoken lies. Miss Marple paused her knitting. Lady Hargrove claimed a pleasant evening with no argument, yet she contradicted her own words about retiring early. Wilkins insisted he served coffee once and left, but his story changed on the timing. That statement contradicts something earlier. Remember what? They lied to protect their secret. Spoken lies emerge when guilt presses too hard. Before I continue, what do you think happened? The fire crackled louder, sending warm air across the chill room. The scent of coal smoke drifted faintly from the chimney, while gravel crunched softly outside as a servant passed. Behavioral tells. Notice how Lady Hargrove's hands stayed too still at first, then trembled when pressed, Miss Marple observed. Wilkins's fingers fidgeted with his buttons whenever the library was mentioned. James and Mr. Price showed nerves, but theirs were different. Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it? These tells revealed guilt when words failed. Elsie twisted her rough, work-worn hands. "I saw them whispering," she said softly. The hot tea cooled untouched in the cups. Hidden connections. The letters and notebook revealed the final piece, Miss Marple said quietly. Lady Hargrove and Wilkins shared a secret affair for over a year. Sir Reginald discovered it and planned to change his will, cutting them both out. Their joint motive was clear: greed and fear of ruin. The smell of sweet biscuits lay forgotten on the plate. Hidden connections often drive the darkest acts. Wilkins suddenly stepped forward, his shoes scraping on the carpet. "Enough!" he cried, voice breaking. "We did it!" She put the first dose in his coffee. I returned later with the second vial when he was alone. We needed the money. The affair. We had no choice after he threatened us. Lady Hargrove rose abruptly, her face twisted. "Be quiet, you fool!" But her hand shook visibly now. He was going to destroy everything we planned. Miss Marple's needles paused completely. How very interesting. People are really very much alike everywhere. One notices these things, living in a village. Dolly gasped, pulling her cardigan tighter. The fire crackled as the full truth settled over the room. The grandfather clock continued its steady ticking, while outside the birds fell silent. Miss Marple looked at each of them in turn. The murderer is exposed. Lady Hargrove and Wilkins acted together. The hunt ends. Truth revealed. Chapter 8. Justice begins. The evening drew in with a cold wind whispering through the trees around Gossington Hall. 2 police constables arrived at the front door, their heavy boots crunching loudly on the gravel drive. The sweet scent of garden flowers mixed with coal smoke from the chimneys as the officers entered the drawing room. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, pushing back the chill that had settled over the house. Inspector Slack led the arrest with a solemn face. "Lady Edith Hargrove and Wilkins, you are under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove." The smooth china teacups from earlier still sat on the table, now cold to the touch. Lady Hargrove rose slowly, her soft wool dress rustling. Wilkins stood stiffly, his soft wool waistcoat suddenly seeming too tight as the handcuffs clicked coldly around his wrists. "Did you catch that?" The window was locked inside. "Yet justice has found its way in, Miss," Marple murmured, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray?" Lady Hargrove's fingers trembled as she was led away, while Wilkins avoided everyone's gaze. Dolly Bantry clutched Miss Marple's arm, the rough tweed of her friend's jacket grounding her. "I still can't believe it, Jane. They seemed so ordinary." The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hall, its chimes marking the end of the long ordeal. Outside, birds sang their evening song against the growing darkness. James Hargrove sank into the worn leather chair, which creaked under his weight. "They really did it together? All for money and their affair?" His rough tweed jacket smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. Relief washed over his face as the truth settled. "I thought I was the main suspect. The arguments, the debts. I was terrified." Mr. Price stood by the window, gripping the frame tightly. The cold glass felt smooth under his palm. "I was certain my land dispute would be blamed. Those heated words at dinner made me look guilty." He let out a long breath, the scent of his pipe tobacco lingering. "Thank heavens it's over. Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it?" No, the real killers had been hiding in plain sight. Elsie the maid hovered near the door, twisting her rough work-worn apron. The comforting aroma of baking bread still clung to her clothes from the kitchen. "I was so scared they'd blame me for finding the body," she whispered, voice soft. Hot tea was brought in fresh, its steam rising warmly and carrying the strong breakfast blend. Her eyes filled with tears of relief. "File this away. It matters later." The innocent were finally breathing freely. Miss Marple turned to the group, her eyes sharp. "Now let us clear the false trails we chased." The fire crackled louder, sending waves of warm air across the chill room. James's gambling debts and midnight walk were real worries, but they had nothing to do with the poison. The timeline fracture of his footsteps was simply him worrying, not murder. She paused, needles clicking thoughtfully. Mr. Price's land dispute seemed suspicious with those raised voices at dinner. Yet he left early and had no access to the coffee tray. That was a red herring that multiplied our confusion. Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with those alibis, but they led nowhere. Before I continue, what do you think happened to those false leads? Dolly poured more hot tea, the smooth china warm in her hands. The smell of lavender polish on the furniture mixed with the faint coal smoke. And Elsie's grudge over the broken vase, she asked. A small quarrel, nothing more, Miss Marple replied. Her story about seeing Wilkins was true and helped crack the case. The supposed mysterious visitor Wilkins invented was another spoken lie to throw us off. That statement contradicts something earlier. Remember what? The red herrings had multiplied beautifully, but now fell away. The home felt lighter as explanations continued. James smiled weakly, the tension leaving his shoulders. Mr. Price nodded, his face no longer flushed with worry. Elsie stood taller, no longer clutching her apron so tightly. The transformations were clear. The village moved from suspicion back toward peace. Miss Marple looked at each cleared suspect with kindness. People are really very much alike everywhere. One notices these things, living in a village. The sweet biscuits on the plate were finally passed around, their dry taste a small comfort after the long day. Gravel crunched outside as the police car drove away with the prisoners. Dolly squeezed Miss Marple's hand. Justice has started its work at last. Justice begins its work. Chapter 9. After the hunt. The morning after the arrest dawned bright but cool. A gentle chill wind moved through the rose gardens of Gossington Hall, while Miss Marple sat with Dolly Bantry in the sunlit morning room. The sweet scent of garden flowers drifted through the open windows, mixing with lavender polish on the furniture and the comforting aroma of fresh baking from the kitchen. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, its chimes marking a new calm over the house. Inspector Slack returned with updates on the legal resolution. The inquest is set for next week, he said, accepting a smooth china cup of hot tea. Both Lady Hargrove and Wilkins have been formally charged with murder. The poison vial and letters provide strong evidence. His boots left faint marks on the carpet as he stood by the fire, which crackled warmly against the morning chill. Dolly sighed with relief, her soft wool cardigan shifting as she leaned back. So it's truly over? No more doubt. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked rhythmically. Yes, my dear. Justice moves steadily now. Did you catch that? The window that was locked inside finally allowed truth to enter. Sharp listeners noticed 3 things wrong with the earlier stories, and now those lies have been answered. James Hargrove entered the room, his rough tweed jacket looking less rumpled today. I've been cleared completely, he said, voice lighter. The debts remain, but at least I'm not suspected of killing my uncle. He sat in the worn leather chair, which creaked softly. The dry taste of sweet biscuits crumbled pleasantly on his tongue as he ate. Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray? His hands were steady now, no longer fidgeting. Mr. Price arrived shortly after, smelling of pipe tobacco and outdoor air. My land dispute is settled peacefully, he announced, gripping the chair arms with relaxed fingers. Reginald's new will leaves me the boundary rights we argued over. No more suspicion hanging over me. The hot tea warmed his hands against the cold morning. File this away. It matters later. The innocent suspect had moved from accused to relieved. Elsie the maid brought in more tea, her apron carrying the fresh scent of baking bread. "I was so frightened they'd blame me for discovering the body," she confessed softly. "Now the housekeeper says I can stay on with better wages." Her rough, work-worn hands moved confidently as she poured. "Something doesn't fit here. Can you see it?" "No." Everything was falling into place at last. "Before I continue, what do you think happened to the village after such a shock?" Miss Marple smiled gently. "How very interesting. People are really very much alike everywhere. One notices these things. Living in a village, the transformations were clear across the estate. The murderer, once hidden behind polite smiles, was now exposed and caught. James, once the nervous nephew under suspicion, walked freely with relief showing in his step. Mr. Price's bluster had softened into quiet satisfaction. The village itself shifted from whispered suspicions and locked doors to open conversations again. Gravel crunched cheerfully underfoot as neighbors visited, and birds sang more brightly in the gardens. In the afternoon, Miss Marple walked the paths with Dolly. The scent of coal smoke from cottage chimneys mixed with blooming flowers. "Futures look clearer now," Miss Marple observed. "James planned to manage part of the estate responsibly, Mr. Price would develop his land without conflict. Elsie hoped to train as a proper housekeeper. Even Wilkins's replacement had been chosen, an honest man from the next village." Dolly touched a rose petal, its soft texture cool in the chill wind. "The hall feels lighter already. No more shadows in the library." The fire crackled inside when they returned, sending warm air through the rooms. The clock ticked peacefully while the kettle whistled from the kitchen. Miss Marple paused her knitting. The village begins to heal. Old friendships mend, and daily life returns. Sweet biscuits were shared once more, their dry taste a symbol of normalcy. The cold metal of the tea tray felt ordinary again, no longer carrying dark secrets. As evening approached, neighbors stopped by with small gifts and kind words. The air filled with sounds of conversation and laughter. The estate, once heavy with suspicion, now breathed easier under the soft wool of comfort and routine. Miss Marple looked out at the peaceful gardens. Life continues despite everything. The village heals. Life continues. Chapter 10. By the fire, Miss Marple sat comfortably in her cozy sitting room in St. Mary Mead, the fire crackling warmly in the grate. A chill wind tapped gently at the windows, while the sweet scent of garden flowers from her own beds drifted inside. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically through soft wool yarn as she worked on a new scarf, the familiar motion soothing after the events at Gossington Hall. The smell of lavender from her sachet mixed with strong tea steaming in her smooth china cup. The clock ticked steadily on the mantelpiece. Birds sang brightly outside in the afternoon light. A plate of sweet biscuits rested nearby, their dry taste pleasant with the hot tea. Miss Marple took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through her. News had arrived from Dolly Bantry by letter that morning. James Hargrove had taken responsibility for part of the estate and was managing his debts carefully. Mr. Price had settled his land matters peacefully and sent flowers in thanks. Elsie the maid was now training as housekeeper and seemed much happier. The village around Gossington Hall had returned to its quiet routines. Miss Marple paused her knitting, needles still. "How very interesting," she murmured. "People are really very much alike everywhere. One notices these things, living in a village." Deep reflection. Let us look back at the 5 categories that guided us through this hunt. The physical evidence, the pulled book, the hidden key, the second vial, and the coffee cup with its faint bluish residue, showed tampering long after Sir Reginald first sat down. These objects that didn't fit in the room told their own silent story of someone returning later to finish the deed. The timeline fractures were equally revealing. James claimed he went to bed at 11, yet gravel footsteps sounded at midnight. Wilkins insisted he retired early, but Elsie saw him near the library. These cracks in time exposed exactly when the poison was added and who had opportunity. Spoken lies multiplied the confusion at first. Lady Hargrove's claim of a pleasant evening with no argument directly contradicted James's account. Wilkins's changing times for serving coffee and checking locks revealed their careful attempts to cover tracks. That statement contradicts something earlier. Remember what? Behavioral tells betrayed them most clearly in the end. Lady Hargrove's hands stayed unnaturally still, then trembled when pressed. Wilkins's fingers fidgeted with his buttons whenever the library was mentioned. Watch their hands, their eyes. What do they betray? These small actions revealed guilt when words could not. The hidden connections formed the final piece. The secret affair between Lady Hargrove and Wilkins, their shared financial desperation, and Sir Reginald's plan to change his will created the motive. These two shared a secret. What connected them was both love and greed. It reminds me of the old case of Mrs. Lydia Symington in St. Mary Mead in 1954. She was found dead in her conservatory, after what everyone called a sudden illness. Her companion, Miss Clark, and the gardener had been secretly involved for years. The parallel was quite striking because Miss Clark had moved a small garden statue near the lemonade table. Something only someone very familiar with the household would adjust without thinking. They used a slow poison, hoping to inherit the property before a new will was signed. The gardener's nervous behavior when questioned and the hidden note found in one of the pots finally exposed them. Miss Clark confessed first, then the gardener broke down completely. The moved statue, the changed times in their stories, and their secret meetings mirrored this case at Gossington Hall almost exactly. Mr. Carruthers's niece in 1952 had done something similar with a porcelain figure and digitalis in the port. Family pressures and hidden relationships so often lead to the same tragic path. People truly are very much alike everywhere. One notices these things living in a village. The small details, a moved object, a trembling hand, a locked window from the inside, always reveal more than grand speeches. 312 words. Why does careful observation matter so much? Because evil rarely announces itself loudly. It hides in small inconsistencies, in objects slightly out of place, in voices that hesitate at the wrong moment. In villages like St. Mary Mead or Gossington Hall, we learn to watch these quiet signs. The listener who followed the 5 categories actively, spotting physical evidence, timeline fractures, spoken lies, behavioral tells, and hidden connections, became a true partner in the hunt. From passive observer to active hunter to satisfied seeker of truth. That transformation is the real reward of these stories. Human nature remains constant. Greed twists love into something dark. Fear of losing comfort drives ordinary people to terrible acts. Yet justice, when guided by patient observation, usually finds its way. The village that turned suspicious and fearful has now begun to heal. Life continues with its teas, its gardens, and its quiet rhythms. Miss Marple set her knitting aside for a moment and looked toward the window. The scent of coal smoke from a neighbor's chimney drifted in, mixing with the lavender and fresh garden flowers. The fire crackled softly, its warmth welcome against the chill wind. Until the next hunt, dear listener, keep watching.